But it's not live.
No. No, it's not like, ooh, I got peanut butter on my finger.
Get a large number of folks there who will never return back to Earth.
No, they can certainly return. Some will return back to Earth.
They will choose to stay there for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, many will. But we need the spaceships back, like the ones that go to Mars. We need them back, so you can hop on if you want.
Yeah.
You know.
Don't judge me.
Well, I'm not the one you have to worry about. This is a video. Lots of people are judging you.
Wow. December 26, 2021. We've been very concerned with physical health compartmentally, in the sense that we've taken the same approach that all pharmaceutical companies want us to take, which is give us a pill, give us a shot, fix something, without really addressing any or even taking accountability for the state of our physical bodies, right? Whether we're overweight or we have comorbidities, maybe not even to our own responsibility, right? But we've taken the approach that we always take, which capitalism and companies always want us to take. Not that it's
you mean that it's about taking something that you can buy rather than managing your physical health in any way on your own.
Well, yeah, there's always money to be made when there's a demand, whether that demand was created or it was nature, like the virus, right? Companies seize the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so there, as far as, that's one thing I'm curious your perspective on is like, it's hard to ask the questions in a way that doesn't, like, I'm not trying to search for a specific type of response, but what is this approach culturally that we always seem to take, and why aren't we addressing things like obesity?
Well,
why is there a smokescreen? Why is it so confusing?
You mean like why? So we know that obesity and lots of different comorbidities create worse conditions for the virus, right?
Yeah.
Make it much more likely that people die and stuff. So why is it then that we don't, emphasize that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bigger question too as to why don't we emphasize that even prior to the virus, right? Because there have been lots and lots of health issues that before COVID ever existed would be incredibly important for longevity, happiness. Why is it that simultaneously it might go along with the question like, why is the United States, along with other countries, seeing such an incredible rise in psychiatric pharmaceutical use to treat depression, when we know that there are lots of other maybe deeper ways of treating those very issues, right? Like, so it's just a big question, right? Like, if being healthy, physically fit and all that means that you're greatly protected from COVID and the worst events of COVID, then, and also if having good friendships and having relationships and having good physical health along with other things would be, say, more effective than even psychiatric drugs for treating psychological issues. Like, why aren't we emphasizing those things? Why is it that we're putting an emphasis on the products and the things that we can sell? I mean, the more cynical answer, I guess, is that it's about selling something. But I think the other answer that might also be cynical is that people are really bad at addressing those issues. It's very complicated why people become overweight, and why people have trouble making friends, and why. So, if you were to tell people that, or if you were to say, hey, smoking is a comorbid issue that increases the likelihood of your dying from COVID by this factor or that factor, then that's not. I would put a lot of money on that would not, even if people really believed that, it would not help them to stop smoking. Mm-hmm. People have known for so many years, that the fact that they're overweight was bad for them, or the fact that they were smoking a lot was bad for them. But that just doesn't do it. I mean, if we add COVID to the issue and say that COVID just increases the chance of dying even more, I guess we can say that fear is not enough for people to address these things, because it's very complicated. It has a lot to do with the fact that people are so anxious, right? So they have to do something with that. So they overeat or smoke, or telling someone to do something healthier with their anxiety is complicated. That's why psychotherapy would take years and years for most people.
Yeah, all those things are complicated. But it's like, how do we, because we don't all come out the same. Mm-hmm. We don't have the same upbringing. I mean, we don't have the same biological makeup from the get-go. We all have personality propensities from early on, and then those get reinforced by experience, or so how much accountability or responsibility should we be taking in regards to the outcome of our life?
Well, in some sense, I guess the answer is 100%, right? But responsibility is an interesting concept, because I think a lot of times people interpret that word to mean something like blame, that you're in some way to blame, that it's a word that can be laden with a certain amount of shame and guilt, that you were at fault for the condition that you find yourself in. Mm-hmm. But I take it a little bit differently. I think you have 100% responsibility, not in that sense, because in that sense, the condition you find yourself in is so complicated, you were not in control of the vast majority of it, like the family you were born into, even the body you were born into, the resources you have at your disposal, the types of choices you make in your relationships. Even that's very complicated, because for most of your life you just didn't know, you don't know what you're doing before you do it. You do it and then you reflect on it later. And so what I mean when I would say how much responsibility, like 100%, I think is you're 100% responsible, in the sense that you are in the sole position of responding to, like if you break down the word, like the ability to respond, right? So you are 100% able to respond and required to respond to whatever situation you find yourself in, whether you're at fault or not, right? So if you find yourself in a situation of being unhealthy or unhappy or that sort of thing, then you can blame yourself or somebody else, and who you blame is probably an attempt to shift that responsibility somewhere. If you're trying to blame somebody else, if you're trying to blame yourself and just feel defeated by it, that's also a way to try to get out of your own ability to respond to the situation. So blame is not really a helpful thing in my mind. But
That seems like all we're doing these days, right?
is blaming.
Yeah, and shaming,
Mm-hmm.
and it's.
Are you referring now to COVID again, or like the political situation around that, or in more in a broader sense?
Well, I think in a broader sense, it's been exacerbated. It's been exposed by COVID, right? Like these things were already happening. It's like people never got out of high school mentality. It's like this. People don't like to take accountability for their actions, right? In so many situations, like it's just a reflection of a deep sickness in our society, I think. It's kind of a victim mentality. And so then there's always the for lack of a better word, like there's an oppressor. Like we always face some type of oppression.
Right.
And little do we know it's our own suppression. Like we are creating the narrative that is oppressing ourselves from accessing a better version of ourselves, you know. We're trapped. Oh, I don't like my job, I can't, you know, but I gotta pay the bills, and those are realities. But like the fact that you can't think your way around that or navigate it, and taking responsibility, like, oh, I chose this.
Right.
It didn't fall into my lap, or, you know, I didn't have any choice. This is what life made. It became me. And so it's the same thing with COVID. It's the same thing as like we're trying to shift the responsibility. Like the whole issue with the vaccine is that it's like this big philosophical quandary. It's like we're in it's a never-ending loop of like it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Right, that's what Biden said recently.
Yeah. Well, they've been pumping that narrative, right? But that's not factual. And that's not factual just based off of what we just said. If you look at the statistics of comorbidities, obesity, all these sorts of things. So you're saying that comorbidities and obesity have nothing to do with it?
I see.
Because that's part of the responsibility. So when we talk about, okay, our tax dollars are paying for those vaccines. Universally, we don't all pay the same amount of taxes, but our tax dollars go to those vaccines. And so we're paying, just like we were paying hospital bills for people that didn't take care of their health, right? It's the same thing of like, why am I paying for that? For someone else's bad decisions.
I see.
So it's always this responsibility game. It's always this, and now it's a lot of shame based, because it's like, no, it's not my fault. I'm vaccinated. It's your fault. And
yeah, no, I think I see what you mean. I mean, there's a way in which the whole discussion of vaccination versus the ability to respect someone's choice to say not get vaccinated, you know, because they feel that they're healthy enough or for whatever reason. You know, it's gotten to the point where, you know, I think we're all very angry with each other. And for the vaccinated, you know, I think one way to think about the motivations to get vaccinated is that you take the danger of the virus very seriously, and you interpret the danger in a certain way, and you're afraid of it. And so in some sense, to some degree, part of the problem is that fear is more complicated than is being talked about, because if the vaccine was something that people felt really protected by, if they were only afraid of the virus and they felt totally protected by the vaccine, there would be no reason for the anger towards other people for not getting vaccinated. For the people who choose not to get vaccinated, there's this feeling like this total intrusion by other people on their lives and what they choose to do with their own bodies, and how often, how many times. Now that's a question of how many times that people should be required to get vaccinated, and this whole idea that if you make one choice to not get vaccinated, well, you're free to do that, but you can't go to a restaurant or a grocery store or anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
And there's understandably that's very upsetting. So you're either somebody who's in one camp getting there are lots of middle ground here, but to conceptualize the extremes, you're in one camp, the vaccinated, feeling like the unvaccinated are like potential contagions to you and your family. And I'm just thinking about this sort of like experientially, phenomenologically. I think there's lots of people who have already talked about like that's had robust discussions about how that's not data based, that it's not reasonable to think that, or it is reasonable to think that.
Yeah, let's talk about it like they're experiencing it,
Yeah, so they're experiencing other people as, so you take on a somewhat paranoid view of the world, and you see other people as failing to do something that you feel is right and wise, and their failure is going to infect you in some way. So, this is a tremendously terrible thing for just relationships between people. That if this is the case, that when some people go outside, they look at others with a lot of fear. And if they walk by somebody without a mask on, they really resent that person and feel very upset that that person has not considered that they might infect them, right? And on the other side, if you're not vaccinated, you look around at all these masked people, and you think, and you go into a restaurant and they ask you for a vaccination card or something, and you just feel like, why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you. And so you could say that that's another, you might say it's another form of, both can create forms of paranoia in the sense that you project onto the other person this sort of evil, this what you see as evil. You see them as this evil force that's either trying to restrict your freedoms, or you see them as an evil force that's going to get inside of you and infect you with the disease.
Yeah. And so you have these two people. So you have two people on either extreme.
Mm-hmm.
That say they're virtually the same person. Maybe got the same job, they got a family in the same area, and one is getting one stimulus and another is getting another stimulus, two different narratives, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the construction of realities, subjective realities. And so, but they have concrete opinions on what they would perceive as objective reality, right? And now you have two people who could be good people. They're good people, but they're completely divided, and they both want things to go back to the way they were. Yet the other person is preventing that on both sides. Because if I believe in the vaccinations and the masks, I go, the unvaccinated are the reason why people are still sick, and they're the reason why I can't go back to work. They're the reason I can't do this. The other side is saying, oh, those vaccinated mask wearers are the reason why that they're pumping fear and we can't get back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's those two extremes, and that divide is not changing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. The only thing I was thinking while you were saying that, I mean, I guess among other things, but one of the things you said was that both want to get back to normal, and I would say that seems to be the consciously expressed idea, that both say they want to get back to normal.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a way in which this whole dynamic kind of fits it seems to be an opportunity for people to play out their aggression and anger towards each other. And I think that that the way that these narratives are getting expressed are expressing things that the left and right have felt towards each other for a long time now. You know, the feeling of being limited in freedom by the other's moral opinions, right? Their moralistic opinions, and the feeling of being sort of disgusted by, say, the right's, you know, moral failings, and the way that those moral failings get into society and infect the environment and get inside of you and really upset you, and you know, that those things. So those are themes that have been there for a long time now, and so now it's COVID is an opportunity to continue to play that out. And the reason I say I would question whether everyone truly wants to get things back to normal. It's sort of like a couple that's fighting. Like if a couple that fights a lot, they say, I just want to stop fighting. But you can kind of see that they seem to relish the fight a little bit, each one in their own way, and they both hate fighting and love fighting. And I think because being angry does have a good feeling associated with it. It's mostly unconscious for most people, but if you really think about it, if you're somebody that fights or really has allowed yourself to express that anger, or gone to a political rally or something like that, and you've felt so right in your opinion and you know what's correct, and you're just like, man, those other people are so stupid and so, oh my god, like fuck them, you know, and like that feels good in a way, and I think, and because so, and you know, part of it's like what you were saying before, is that it does shift responsibility to the other person, which is reaction to guilt. So instead of feeling guilty and uncertain about things, because to me the natural response to COVID, for instance, would be to be very uncertain. In fact, I would say this about most political situations. The more realistic perspective to me about most political situations, most things represented in the news, and including COVID, would be to be very uncertain about almost all of it, right? That what we know is that we hear certain things. We hear this and we hear that and we hear this and we hear that. But how many of us are in the labs? You know, how many of us are doing the actual research? You know, I think there probably I expect that there, you know, most people who do the research know more about it than I do, but I don't think that they should have a lot of certainty either, because they're just looking at one piece of the big puzzle. Yeah. So what's suspicious about the larger reaction to this whole thing, to me, is how much, and it's always suspicious about how people deal with political issues, is that that people are so certain. They're so confident.
Well, there's two things I thought of, two like comparisons when you were talking. I thought about, well, at this time, people never felt so divided, but also so connected at the same time, right? We're in the age of connection, but also before all this division, it was harder to bond, right? Like we created tribes now. And so they feel a sense of like purpose, a sense of togetherness with certain people, right? And so yes, division, but also, and this is kind of like, I thought of two comparisons, and they're not that great, but one is you hear about vets coming back, right, from war, and you think about them reintegrating into society, but when they have that brotherhood, they could be out killing people, right, for a cause, of course, on a mission ordered, but there's not like that sense of companionship is hard to find when they come back, you know. And so to reintegrate, they have these real highs and lows, and they're isolated in this team, right? And they're out doing missions and having a purpose, but then they come back, and it's hard for them to come down from that heightened state and that camaraderie that they experienced abroad. Also, both of these require isolation. So if we talk about COVID, right, and we talk about the mental health, there's a certain, we've all experienced isolation. And when you were talking, I was thinking about road rage, right, in the sense of,
yeah, it feels good.
Yeah, I have an objective to go this way, and this motherfucker cut me off. You know, you lose your shit. But that experience is very much what we're experiencing as a whole society at this point, right? We were on this flow state, and now all of a sudden somebody cuts us off. You know, what the hell? And we have these crazy reactions in the car that we wouldn't have face to face.
Well, that's the illusion, though, that we were in a flow state before, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we think when we're cut off, and like, oh, I would have been fine if he didn't cut me off, or they didn't cut me off, and you know, we're thinking, you know, we would be fine if, you know, the left or right were, you know, not doing what they were doing. Society would be fine. You know, it's very convenient always to, you know, assign so much weight of the blame to one side or the other, and then, but yeah, it's an illusion, of course. I mean, because the truth is so often much more like, well, in the example of road rage, we're enraged. We don't get enraged if we left early enough to get to the place, right? So we felt a little bit guilty to begin with, and then the person cuts us off, and so we weren't in a flow state. We were feeling a little bit bad about the situation. We were feeling internal conflict, in other words. So a lot of times, I think when I say that there's a certain amount of paranoia in the political situations, that is an externalization of internal conflict. So there's a relief in that, and so the illusion is always that we would be fine if only, you know, this other person or these other people would get on board with things. But, you know, I think if you were to hold the whole COVID situation in uncertainty, we would all feel a certain amount of anxiety about it, because no one knows exactly like how dangerous it is. Like, I don't, you know, for instance, because I just think, you know, I hear this and I hear that, and these people are confident over here and these people are confident over here, and this makes a bit more sense to me, but you know, I think if when it comes down to it, if I were to get COVID, I would be like, well, we'll see how this goes. You know, most people I know seem to be fine, and I think it's, you know, I think I will be. You know, I don't think I'm too worried about it, but, you know, there are enough people out there who are so afraid, and there's also just the fact that I've never had it before. You know, it's there's a lot that's new about it. Anxiety comes with uncertainty, right? So, and most things in life are uncertain, and these narratives, what they seem to do is they do several things. You know, they provide a certain amount of certainty, which relieves almost all the anxiety. So instead of internal anxiety that you feel inside, you feel anger, so you project it outwards towards the other person. So now instead of internal conflict, oh, I'm not really sure, is it this, is it that, you know, what should I do? It's more like, no, I know what to do. They're representing the thing that's wrong, and you know, my conflict is with them.
And that's an interesting human trait, is that life is uncertain. Existentialism, right? Like this existential angst we're born with is the same reason religions were created, right? Right? So, I mean, whether you believe in a religion or not, the doctrines and the things that were written were created by humans. That's fact. But that same issue that uncertainty, the way we deal with it, is to come back to homeostasis. Like, let's make things certain. So that's why I always said we're in an era of cults right now. We're in an era of when religion has disappeared, seemingly. The majority of people are not associated with a specific religion.
Yes.
We have now filled it, that space, with political ideology, and for right now, stances on COVID.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, you know, when Trump was in office, it became really political ideologies that people were divided on. Then with COVID, it seems to have broken things up into smaller tribes, in the sense of like vaccination and unvaccinated people on both sides have different levels, you know, of comfortability with that. So that's not directly correlated to the political spectrum.
I see. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I think it's not totally correlated. But
You could say it's
there's a pretty
associated.
high correlation, but it's not totally correlated. There are exceptions.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, like, for example, one, like, off top is just, like, vaccinations, right? If you go to, like, the hippie community.
Right, yeah. Hippies who don't want impure things in their bodies, you know, they would normally be on the
Pharmaceutical
left.
companies, yeah.
Yes, and then, yeah, and there are people on the right who, you know, don't like the mandates, but are happily getting vaccinated.
Or they're in an at-risk age group.
Yeah.
Right? You could say that a lot of conservative people are maybe older, right? You could say the demographic is probably on the older side, at least like you're talking about conservative Republicans from a while back. Now, they're in 60 and up, maybe the majority of them. And so statistically, that's an at-risk age group. So their vaccination, as much as they, but it also, you could say, like, yeah, they might believe in capitalism so much that they go, see capitalism at work, perfect. The vaccines, billions of dollars shifted to create effective vaccines, and here it is, you know. Yeah. Republicans don't have a problem with pharmaceutical companies, you know.
Right, they don't. Well, and I think Republicans generally don't seem to have I mean, not wholesale. Like there is a large anti-vaccination group within the conservatives.
Yeah.
But like from the ground up, it's not kind of built into the ideology. I think most of the anti-vaccination conservative groups are really anti-vaccination mandate or anti-vaccination requirement, whether that's, you know, the COVID vaccine or flu vaccines or or any other type of vaccines. Don't tell me what to do. You can't take that freedom away from
that's
me.
another divide, right? It's like, yeah, they believe in the freedom to choose. So that they might be all for the vaccine, but they might go, we still have to give people the choice.
Right. That would be the thing, and I think. But yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, I'm tempted to get into like what would the left say and what would the right say, but I think what you were saying before really interests me, which was, that we're in an age of cults, and the idea that, we really do, use these different ideologies to replace, there is this kind of, there appears to be this sort of primal existential condition that is uncertain. I mean, this is what the Greek tradition of the skeptics and the Pyrrhonist skeptics thought, that really suffering, psychological suffering, or of course they didn't have that term psychological at that point, but I think what we would call psychological suffering for them was created by beliefs, and beliefs are seen as basically attempts to replace the primal uncertainty of things with certainty, to superimpose it. So all dogmas come into that, all religious beliefs, and actually, even now it would be scientific beliefs as well. Science would be sort of like the new religion.
You're saying Greeks said beliefs led to suffering.
The Greek skeptics, yeah.
Greek skeptics, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds similar to like Eastern philosophy, right?
Yes, actually, yeah. So there is a big connection between the Pyrrhonian skeptics and the Buddhists and yogis. There was some cross-pollination of ideas there. Like the Greeks, Pyrrho, who was the guy who kind of started that philosophical school of thought, went with Alexander the Great to India, and there was some. He seemed to learn a lot from them and integrate that into Western thinking. So, the skeptical tradition does harvest a lot from the East, and so we see.
Call it Midwest. It's the Midwest philosophy.
So now though this would be science would be a belief system largely to them, because you can say, for them you would always say, they would be happy to say, look, the things that appear to you, you can work with that. Those aren't beliefs. Like, it seems to me that I'm holding the cup and that's rigid and hard and warm, and that wouldn't be questioned exactly. But if someone else did a scientific study, you can kind of make you can kind of surmise certain things, or have your own guesses or approximations as to what a scientific study might be talking about. But they would say, look, if you're not looking at, if that stuff isn't appearing to you directly, you don't really know. I mean, there are so many things. So right now what we have is like everyone on every side seems to be quoting science as if science is like the ultimate truth. But if that were the case, it seems to contradict itself a lot. I mean, there are just different ways of interpreting the data.
100%.
And and then of course, people do very thorough jobs of trying to pick apart whether data was even, arrived at in the correct way or in a rigorous enough way.
That's what I've been diving into recently, is like going back and brushing up on my statistics, like the equations, and like looking at experimental design, and really analyzing the research that these people are quoting, right? And you start to see that the majority of the media is just parroting something of an interpretation of an interpretation of an interpretation. It's like telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and the crazy part too is with all this stuff is like, if you look at experimental design, you're talking about like statistical significance and all these types, and then you're talking about deviation, right? And you're talking about like, what is the spectrum?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty in science, and scientists know this much better. What it's like, that's one of the things, like when you're saying that the news anchors are parroting an interpretation of a distillation of different scientific studies, but they parrot it with a added performance of an incredible amount of certainty. Mm-hmm. Look, you have to be, not pulling a lot of punches and implying that you have to be an idiot to disagree with this. You have to be, an idiot to believe that vaccinations are necessary. You have to be an idiot to believe that you could be safe without a vaccination. This is heavily implied, and not just an idiot, an immoral one. A terrible person, but.
How long will the antibodies last? We don't even know.
Yeah, and people pretend to know, and I think this, if my experience in talking to actual scientists is always like, that they don't present information like that.
No.
They would say,
here's the conclusion.
It's like, it's very complicated. We did this one study that tried to control so many variables to produce something as close to certainty as possible, but that's just one dot, like one single dot of information, and of something like a virus, and how a virus interacts with billions of different bodies that are all unique is like insanely complex, right? Like, it's just totally, and how a vaccine interacts with millions of different bodies is also insanely complex.
So then we're also depending on doctors. Typically, you have your physician or whatever. The doctor you go to is you've designated him as the end all be all, and he's the one that's supposed to be synthesizing this information for you.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, not everybody's good at their job. Mm-hmm. Right? There's lazy doctors too. And the fact is they don't have time. And they're looking at the information, and the information is so new. You're talking about you have to fuse all these different studies together to get a general understanding of it. And it comes down this is why I didn't become a nutritionist too. Was because you're trying to isolate all these different variables within the human body, right? We're all exposed to different stimulus every single day. And we have some commonalities for sure. Our genetics, genetics vary.
Mm-hmm.
Our food varies. Our medical history, like maybe you had a parasite when you were younger, and you took some antiviral medication, and there's all these different variables, and how are you going to isolate it? It's the same thing with food. Like, does cooking with seed oils lead to heart attacks later in life? Well, good luck.
Well, yeah, it's maybe, I think one of the strengths of how the scientific method is applied is that it does try to control for a lot of variables, and so if you do enough of that type of research, you can kind of generate enough data over a long time. Of course, it's very arduous. Because when you control more variables, it creates a specific piece of information that has a reduced range of application to other contexts, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not able to apply that piece of information if you were to change how you control the other variables even a little bit. right? But if you kind of, okay, we controlled them in this way and we got this piece of information, and then we changed how we controlled them a little bit this way, right? And then we got another piece of information, and we're learning a little bit each time, right? So the kind of the Western scientific method and how it's applied in the modern day, like in labs and that sort of thing, where you're running just, there are many students in medical schools and in graduate programs that are just kind of slaving away running, thousands of experiments, and that's a lot of what they do, and what they try to write in such a way as to precisely describe exactly the procedure and so on. So it's very meticulous and impressive in that regard. But of course, at the same time, that would create a certain kind of weakness. And I mean, this is a discussion I think that scientists have quite often, is that if you control the variables more, then you have less of a range of application kind of to different things. But if you control the variables less, you might get something closer to the more natural picture, but the resulting information you get is a little bit less concrete and certain and so on. But I think for the most part, and I know some scientists I know who would kind of like, who always disagree with me when I say this, but I think in my mind, a lot of times what scientists are going for is to create as much certainty as possible in the results that they find. And I think that when it comes to life, when it comes to bodies, and to me, the scientification of psychology is a huge problem, because all of these systems are so complicated, and they are always existing in relationship to contexts that are always changing, and always affecting things in infinitely complex ways.
Yeah, it's like the reductionistic.
Yeah, the reductionistic approach, right, rather than the holistic approach. And so, I think I think a really brilliant person and a great doctor will always be able to kind of look past the data and to kind of be able to theorize about how, why does the data express itself in that way, to ask the deeper questions. And I think that maybe that's like less certain, theories. I think you should definitely be uncertain about theories for sure. I mean, but
that's what a hypothesis is.
But theorizing does kind of help. A brilliant person will always be wondering what's at the heart of this here. What's going on here? What's really causing all of this?
And I mean, that kind of brings me to the point of like, that's one thing we are in control of is our mind, right? In these times there's not much we can control in the political arena and science, but like bringing it back to the experiential, it's like, for me, when I do this type of research, it isolates me. It isolates me in the sense that I know other people aren't doing the same amount of the same amount of rigorous analysis, and so it divides me more when I hear other people theorize, right? You hear other people talking about their opinions and their perspectives, and at the same time I understand them. But that's the problem, is that there's a huge divide in the education that it takes to synthesize this information. And I'm not saying that I am capable of synthesizing it. I'm just saying that people people don't know statistics, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, people don't know how to analyze studies
They
and to
don't know.
critically analyze studies for sure.
They don't.
But I think the other divide that I'm not. I think knowledge is a part of it, right? Like what you've been taught and what you've practiced. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think another divide that you're experiencing is that the way people engage in political opinions or opinions about the virus or any number of things, we very much like to think that we're rational creatures, but I think that a lot of thinkers have shown that we're not, from like Nietzsche and Freud and many people that I wouldn't be able to recall off the top of my head, but I think it's pretty apparent that we don't work that way. The idea that we kind of come to our beliefs and opinions through rational steps is mostly an illusion, right? But if you're rigorous about it and if you're kind of reflect on your own opinion in discussion, you can kind of become more sophisticated in your thinking, because you've taken into account both an awareness of your own motivations in thinking about things, along with trying to consider other sides of things. But even then, we very much don't know what we're up to most of the time. And I think that the rational perspective, that we are kind of reasoning it out and coming up with perfectly rational opinions, helps us to feel more confident, right? Like, I bet you if you talk to any number of the people who you feel very isolated from, they also feel that they arrived at their opinion in some sort of, reasonable way, though you may very well be right that they weren't as rigorous, and that's frustrating. But people come to their political beliefs and that sort of thing as a way of relieving certain types of anxiety, and also as a way of getting out aggression, and as a way of, as you were pointing out, identifying with certain groups, right, to cure their experience of alienation. So, people are feeling so alienated from each other, and I think the virus has come along and just kind of like let that experience of alienation blossom and show itself to us even more. The fact that we look at each other as potential infectants and dangers or restrictors, and but this culture has been getting more and more alienated over time. It would seem that way to me. I mean, I don't know, but it seems that way to me by virtue of the fact that our way of communicating with each other and connecting with each other is so much more technologically mediated that it's just less intimate, it's less messy, it's less involved, we're less willing to go there. And so anyways, I think that when people come up with a belief, you come up with a belief from certain motivations that are largely you may largely be unaware of, right? Like, so for a long time for me, it would be like I would think about what Dad would say about a political issue, and I had such a relationship with him where I would want to identify with him, right? So it'd be very hard to really neutrally consider the other side of things, because when it came down to it, I would try to neutrally consider it, but I would always return back, because to create a ripple in that identification with my father would be too painful for me at certain times in my life, right? So that's one part of it, that we want to, and if our friends think a certain way, we want to identify with them, unless we're angry with them. in which case we might say fuck them, and they were wrong about lots of things, including about politics, and now I've changed my mind, right? Like, or, you know, I think I've also thought, I think introverted people have for a long time experienced the restrictions and regulations around COVID to be less onerous, at least at first, you know, and in fact, largely a relief. And so for introverted people who felt too guilty to reject invitations, social invitations from friends and that sort of thing, that took a burden off, right? And if you were extroverted, like I am, you know, I always felt like, God, these restrictions, oh God, you know, just so awful for me personally. And but you know, I think everyone suffers from them. But what you come to believe about them, you know, it's complicated. It has to do with what tribe you want to belong to. It has to do with, you know, what suits your lifestyle the best. It has to do with, you know, what allows you to, you know, get angry at the people you want to. And I think that I think you're right, though, that basically very, very few people really do the research, because that would interfere. It would make things less certain for the most part. Because really, to do research, to look into things, you have to suspend judgment, right? You have to suspend knowing. And to really do it, if you don't suspend knowing, your research is just a farce, right? It's just a complete fake.
I think this is at the core of this dilemma we're in, is that uncertainty, the suspending of not knowing. It's like it put uncertainty that uncertainty in nature always existed. The uncertainty of our life expectancy to expect is at the core of this.
Yes, right. Our relationship to death is huge in this.
Yeah.
Because, I think for you know, this is really bringing this up. You know, a lot of people, you know, for the most part, we're very good at defending against our death anxiety. So we don't think about the fact that we don't know when we're going to die. We very well could die any moment. And my favorite thing that this author, Carlos Castaneda, would say about death was that death, whenever it comes, it's going to take you suddenly and unexpectedly and completely. And then it's over, you know? So whatever death is, you know, whatever you think death is, when it comes, it's, you know, final, and it's not going to come because you've, you know, for the vast majority of people, it's not going to be coming because you decided this was your time to go, you know. It's going to, so even if you do live to the ripe old age of like 90 or something, it doesn't really matter, right? Because when death comes, it's complete, right? So the longevity of your life is not the most important thing here, you know, because you're still going to be dead. But anyhow, it could also come tomorrow, because one thing that seems apparent in life is that death itself is incredibly uncertain, right? And I mean, look at all these people. I mean, this is very sad that I've heard about probably more deaths this year in my like second degree circle of people that I know, or first degree in some cases, where I've known someone personally who's died of other causes other than COVID, you know. And you know, you can't really, there's no way to directly connect that, you know, but it just creates a certain ironic situation here, that in the midst of trying to avoid death in one way, still plenty of people are being thrust into it in another way. You know, whether that, you know, is suicide or cancer or stroke, or, you know, this is those are all things I've heard about, very close, whereas I've heard about 2 people, that I can remember who died from COVID, and for the most part, they feel a little further to me. So anyways, I'm not trying to create a numbers game here. I'm just trying to say that there's an irony in the fact that we try to avoid death so much, and we also, in doing so, create situations where we live less fully because we're not really willing to risk things, and also death takes you anyways.
Death is coming.
Yeah.
Death is coming. Yeah, it's hard to deal with. It's hard to conceptualize. It's hard. I think about it occasionally, and I think like, dang, you kind of have this, like, I don't know if you have this. I have this sometimes, like, wouldn't it be nice to like sit at your own funeral?
I do it in my head all the time.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to sit at your own funeral? Like, you see all your friends.
Yeah.
You see them, like, how much they cared about you. It's kind of romantic, right? It's like, oh, dang, they really did care about me. Look at them cry,
I hope anyways.
But, like, it's kind of sad that we may not experience that love from the majority of our peoples while we're living, right?
Yeah.
And you see how much you impacted them. Everybody's coming up to the stage saying how much you inspired them or impacted their life. My life changed when I met him or her. And it's an interesting idea to sit at your funeral, right? But, like, you're not going to be.
Yeah.
You're gone. And you won't, that's why I think it's so important. This has been thrusted. Death has been put in front of us now. It's on our dinner plate, per se, with COVID. COVID's on, it's being served for dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we can't avoid it. We can't avoid the thought of it. It's always there. But actually now, COVID has drifted so far, because initially everybody was scared in the beginning. We didn't know what it was.
Right, yeah.
And so, there wasn't camps yet. There wasn't tribes yet. But death was in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And now, it's still in front of us, but COVID is not associated with that anymore. It's not associated with death anymore.
Right.
It's associated with ideology.
Yeah.
It's associated with beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we are living now, and we're not taking advantage of it. It feels like, it's like, it's hard to say that, but death is imminent. It's always been a part of nature, and just like you said, it comes completely. It's coming for everybody, and I listened to your talk on death, and the thing that you talked about was like, to really acknowledge death is to fully live. You said something like that, right? Is to contemplate it so you live life fully, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, totally. And I think my one of my points there was that it's very, very hard to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm constantly in doubt as to whether, I don't think I've done it at any given time, right? So, but there's something about that like the elusiveness of being able to acknowledge that it's there. Actually, this philosopher, Martin Heidegger, said that...
I remember I quoted Heidegger once and I got all this flack for it.
Oh, because he was a
Nazi.
Well, anyways, he's also brilliant, so
yeah, you can be brilliant and you can be a bad person.
There's also there's a lot of debate about how really, like, into that he was. I think some people would hate me for even raising uncertainty about that, but like,
don't get canceled now. It's like, no, there's no gray there.
But that's besides the point. Like, if you want to erase Heidegger from history, you're erasing enormous advances in all the social sciences that are. Heidegger is still one of, I think, to this day is the most quoted philosopher, like in the world. So social sciences, your favorite postmodernists, whoever you're into, they rely heavily on Heidegger, either directly or indirectly. But if you were to erase him, you'd erase almost all of your favorite thinkers, all your favorite modern thinkers. So that's an apology for Heidegger. But anyhow, one thing he said about death was that if you're lucky, there's going to be a moment in your life when you realize, oh my God, I really am going to die. And I don't know that I've had that moment. I'm really kind of obsessed with the role death has in how we live and our relationship to death and whether we accept that it's there and coming. But I do think that there are many people who have had these moments. Very often for a lot of people it's experienced through like a midlife crisis or something like that, where
Or
like
a near-death experience.
or a near-death experience possibly. But even then, some people experience those and don't have that quiet experience, like, oh my God, I am going to die. In fact, many people come back from near-death experiences, and you hear a lot about it now, like they're convinced that death isn't really so final. There's something beyond that. I'm not so certain about that, right? Like I think death is kind of like the ultimate uncertainty. Like no matter how many mystics or people who have had near-death experiences or whatever, if you haven't had that yourself, you just can't know. And so
I feel like if you're living life with the idea that there's an afterlife, it's kind of like a form of procrastination.
Yeah, that's right. Just
It's
putting
like
everything off into
tomorrow. It's
Yeah,
tomorrow.
living for heaven, being in this world but not of this world, right? That'd be the Christian thing.
Yeah.
And because it's like this life is a blip, and so Nietzsche would agree completely, because Nietzsche was saying that there are all these kind of like true world theories out there from Plato, who felt there was a world of forms, and then there's Christianity, and he hated Christianity for this, because it's like, okay, there's heaven at the end of it all, so that's eternity, and your life here basically means nothing compared to that. It's so how can you live authentically when you feel that this life actually isn't that meaningful? Now, some people would disagree with this, right? Some people would say that, look, actually being aware of an afterlife infuses this life with so much purpose. You know what it's about, right? But I think
you got to get other people there too, right?
Yeah, you got to get other people there, and that this is about love, and about a certain kind of love and a way of expressing that. And but no, I think Nietzsche was right about it, that actually you can't just solve life's biggest problem, that we don't know what it's about, with the snap of your fingers and say, okay, we know what it's about because someone's told me that this is going to happen later. For Nietzsche and all the existentialists, they would say, you have to find that for yourself. Someone can't just give that to you. So, which doesn't mean that life is meaningless. People often confuse it with nihilism, but it's not nihilistic. It's not saying that life is meaningless. That would be another form of certainty that the existentialists wouldn't be willing to impose. They would say, we don't know, but you may discover, in the your process of kind of being in this life and kind of becoming who you are, that life does mean something incredible to you, and it's about embracing that. But for the existentialist, the problem would be about all this like afterlife stuff. Is it creates this kind of prescription, you know? It's inauthentic in a sense. That being said, look, if you've had a near-death experience and you had that for yourself, that doesn't seem particularly inauthentic to me. Like, if you had a near-death experience, went somewhere, you know, you were alive while your brain was off, and, you know, you were aware while your brain was off, you know, all these things that people talk about with the near-death experiences, and you know, met God or had an experience of peace and serenity and love, and came back with the confidence that your life was about something. I mean, that seems like a representation of what it means to you. You know, no one told you that. You know, no, it wasn't a religion that came and told you. You had to believe that or know that. You discovered that. So that doesn't seem inauthentic to me. But the truth is, the vast majority of it is a belief system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to cope with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that's the human condition, really.
Mm-hmm.
Human condition is to be uncertain, and we have all these things that represent certainty in our realities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it could be our social media profiles, right? Like, this is who I am, and everybody validates me with likes and follows.
Oh, right. Yeah, the illusion of who you are, as if you could be certain about who you are, as if it's a static thing.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's ever changing, and actually there's times where I've gone back and like I've deleted posts, right? Like, I'll just take my posts off and I go, whoa, you know, nobody knows who I am anymore. It's so weird, right? You're so integrated into these social media. It's like, I can create a new identity now. Imagine, for all those people out there that got social media profiles, it's like, imagine you were to shut this one down and just create one from scratch.
Yeah.
Or just take a break and then create one. Would you be a different person?
Well, sorry.
Well, you just follow momentum a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there are a couple people who I think had some really, like, I think there's a huge weakness to the existence of social media at all, right? Because one of the big weaknesses, Sartre would talk about how it's like people's perception of you is very trapping. It has this incredibly powerful effect, that we are always caring about what other people think of us. The fact that this camera is here right now while we're having a conversation changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it could never be as though the camera is not there.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are people that represents, and there's an added perception. Like, he had the idea that this very interesting example of like a peeping Tom. There was a guy who he would just gave this as an example. So there's a guy looking through a hole in a door at a woman who's undressing. Mm-hmm. And for him, just being there all by himself, you know, completely unobserved, you know, he's just there in the experience of gazing at this woman, right? And for him, it's just a beautiful moment, you know, he's seeing her beauty, and appreciating it, getting off on it, I don't know. But whatever experience he's having, it's like, it's maybe unadulterated by any judgments that a third person might have about it. But then in this example, someone else comes in, sees him from behind, looking, you know, at her, and he notices, and then he looks, and then he's frozen in a number of different ways. Frozen with fear, but also frozen in that person's gaze. Now he's been transformed completely into a peeping Tom, you know. Mm-hmm. So now he is something that the other person has created in him. Now, you could take the example further. What if the door flew open and the girl saw him looking, right?
Yeah.
And that would change her experience, right? Because she was just undressing and now she feels violated and that sort of thing. But it just, in multiple ways, it shows how the gaze of another person is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
In informing who you are.
well, and it's in how you experience yourself in a way,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really. It is. No, I think there's a lot of truth in what you just said. It's just it's a point that's kind of hard to locate exactly, because is it informing who you are, or is it causing you to struggle with how someone else experiences you, and then you internalize some of that,
Well, that's the dance.
or resist that. You have to respond to that,
Yeah.
because even if that guy keeps looking and says, screw you, I don't care, that's a response, and that's a dramatic response in a way. Very hard to do.
Well, that's the dance that we all experience, regardless of social media or not, right? Unless we're in isolation.
Well, it's
right?
true, yeah.
It's always about how we identify, but then it's also trying to communicate our identity to the outside world so that we can find people that we enjoy spending time with. We build community and all that sort of stuff. So it's always a dance. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes with social media, you could be playing characters on there. You can be a complete alternate identity.
Mm-hmm.
And people sometimes compartmentalize that. But sometimes people also try and manifest destiny through it, right? Which can
Mhm.
also be beneficial in some ways. I want to be this person, right?
Mhm.
And so you start to create this character, but then it starts to inform you like, holy shit, I could be that person,
Yeah, yeah.
So it can be a tool that can be used for good, but it also can create a lot of confusion and a lot of, there's a lot of people that, they create some sort of niche and they can't expand upon it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, exactly, because there is something that can be very trapping about your identities.
We were talking about Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about Jordan Peterson. Yes.
Oh, yes, yeah. How he plays a role, and he knows the role that he's playing,
Yes.
right? And so, and he takes that role very seriously, which I think can be very valuable, to people too, because in a way he's saying, look, I'm gonna be this person to my audience, and I know people are wanting this from me, and I'm going to continue to do that, and also have some spontaneity in it and so on. But I think your experiment with social media, like, let's erase it all and then imagine what could happen. Like, Carlos Castaneda explored that idea. Because Carlos Castaneda wrote, he was kind of like a phony social anthropologist who went down to, he claimed that he went down to Central America and met somebody who he was going to interview about peyote, and then he met this Native American named Don Juan, and then Don Juan started, instead of being his informer about peyote, ended up taking Carlos into his tutelage in a form of sorcery. And it was basically a way of teaching Carlos a philosophy about how to approach life in a more, basically it was a more phenomenological way, but a way of suspending all your beliefs and assumptions about the world to experience it in a more marvelous and wonderful and mysterious way, less habituated. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he ended up teaching Carlos was that he said, your friends, all of the ones you've known for a long time, who've known you for a long time, who feel like they know you very well, get rid of them, all of them. I just never see them again. And basically he did that, and he said do that, and along with a number of other things, as a way of erasing your sense of self, of who you are, of feeling that you know who you are, and also the trap of feeling that other people know exactly who you are. And there's an important difference there, because there are different types of knowledge, right? It's a wonderful thing for people to know you and to be intimate with you. Like in Spanish, the verb conocer is like that, right? To interpersonally know like another person. But to saber is a fact, to know a fact. And so when we set up identities for ourselves, it creates more rigid lenses through which people have expectations of us and see us. And so the struggle with social media may be that it does I suppose it depends how you engage with it, but it can create a sort of more rigid type of record of like, okay, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is my belief, this is my idea, this is what to expect of me. You know, and if I created one, I might list a number of things about me, like I'm a psychologist, I'm somebody who's done this and this and this, and here are some videos to portray who I am. But so that gets closer to more like a factual, rigid way of expecting and knowing things for me and projecting onto me. Whereas a more interpersonal form of knowing is based in authenticity and spontaneity. And you may notice that the friends you love the most are the ones who let you be as you are, without expecting you to be the same person you were yesterday or the day before.
Yeah. Those are the best friends.
Yeah. That's real love. Yeah.
You can feel that. Yeah. It's not, you have friends that you enjoy certain activities with, and they know you as this or that. It's interesting. I've been noticing recently, even in myself, that just speaking with people, it's almost like if I speak to somebody where we're both dancers or something, right? And we both have a mutual respect for each other. My ideas flow more fluidly. Where versus somebody who doesn't know me at all or respect me or have any reason to respect me, right? As far as, knowing me for any reason, my thoughts are discombobulated, they don't flow as easy. My ability to recall facts or things like that, it's like
how much someone respects you changes that? Or whether or not
it's not how much, it's just I guess it's just knowing somebody, it like knowing somebody, knowing what they do, having a familiarity of who they are. So I guess it makes sense. I can't expect to be access who I am in front of a stranger. I guess that's what I'm referring to. You feel that friction sometimes when you're speaking with somebody who doesn't know you.
Well, it's an interesting experiment, though. I mean, it's sort of like your experiment of erasing your social media profile and starting fresh.
Exactly.
So I tried, when I was reading Carlos Castaneda's books, I was so excited about it. I almost got into like a hypomanic state of like being bewildered by the world and seeing everything as very mysterious and kind of trying to take his advice very seriously.
Like you're trying to eliminate all habits and like triggers.
Yes, right, all habits and everything, and to create a life where it's really like, okay, every moment is a choice. Nothing is predetermined. I don't have to go along with some plan. And everything I perceive may have some marvelous significance I haven't discovered yet. For all I know, it may not, of course, but because we often look at the world as a way of robbing it of meaning. Because that's just that. It's just that. Oh, this person's just that. That person's just that. This kind of, it's just as I already know it to be. So you never let yourself get surprised anymore, even by yourself or by other people.
That's kind of like my mantra, that I kind of discovered this mantra in Vietnam, where it was like, stay curious, stay fascinated.
Right.
And
And how do you do that though? You have to suspend judgment, and by judgment I also mean suspend judgment and suspend knowing.
yeah, exactly. You walk the same streets every day, but you have to be open to experience. And
Right.
that's what I was like, everything became kind of gray, everything became like, once you feel this when you travel, it's like the first 2 weeks is fire. Everything is wow.
Everything's a wonder, yeah.
Whoa, oh my God, everything's thrilling. After 2 weeks, you almost get, it depends where you're at, it depends on a lot of things, but that depression is coming for me. So it
Right.
comes back to the wonder is gone, and then everything becomes normal again, normalizes. You find comfort again.
Mm-hmm.
And you're no longer necessarily the new kid on the block, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where people are experiencing you for the first time, so their thrill wears off.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're back to square one of normality.
And I wondered if maybe we need that. Maybe we need to have this ebbing and flowing of that. But I do.
I like to chase it.
Yeah.
I like that contrast. That's another thing I always say is like life is about contrast. And so like if you're not experiencing contrast, you don't know what you have and what you don't.
Mm-hmm.
When something's stripped from you, you recognize it. When you get it back, if you get it back, then you appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all these sorts of things. It's like traveling. Oh, that's what a bed feels like. I've been sleeping on the floor for a while, or that's what home feels like.
Yeah.
Because I've been traveling so long.
Yeah.
What does home feel like? I'm so grateful for home now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can just relax and you don't have to go nowhere. I got full access to my entire closet. I'm not living out of a backpack.
Mm-hmm.
All that sort of stuff. But it keeps you fascinated, But then when you travel so much, it becomes normal. The change becomes normal.
Right.
Everything's new all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's another new thing. And that is something that I experienced in Southeast Asia when I was traveling all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was always chasing the new, but then the new became normal and boring. Not boring, but it lost its steam too. Yeah. Partly because of lack of sleep too. But yeah, it's interesting how these things kind of cycle.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've always found that I'm not able to sustain that. Like the wonderful experience you might get on acid, right? Like acid is a great way to experience like newness, right? Like as if all the most mundane and ordinary things are new again.
Yeah.
And I think it is a wonderful practice to. I do this in psychotherapy, for instance. Like if I'm talking to a patient, this was an idea. It's an idea that's talked a lot about in certain parts of psychoanalysis. Like a guy named Wilfred Bion, gets into this, and Freud, I think, has his own. Really was the initiator of this, but that you go in without when you're talking to somebody, you suspend knowing. So people probably have experienced that most therapists don't do this. Most therapists think they know everything about you, right? And I think it's a terrible thing about many therapists is that they think they know so much about you, because it really does trap you a bit.
Yeah.
But I think when I'm talking to patients, and I think it's whenever I can remember to, I think it's a very useful thing with friendships, and a very important thing with anybody that you love, is to let them not just be in a static way, but to become, so that they're always changing. So in other words, the way Bion put it is to go into every session with a patient without memory, desire, or understanding. And so that's very interesting. So because for most therapists, that's all they have going into it. They're like, okay, so this is what happened last week, and this is what happened last month, and this is what I have a bunch of notes on it, you know, and then so they go in with lots of memory, and then they go in with this therapeutic, what Freud called therapeutic ambition, like this desire to get the patient to be somewhere, and to achieve the goals of therapy, and then understanding that's for beyond. I think his use of that term is more like knowledge. It's like it's feeling that you know things about the person, and so this person's a hysteric or depressed or bipolar, or like all of the ways that psychologists are trained to think about people, like diagnostically. He would say, well, that's incredibly unhelpful to carry that with you into every interaction with the person, to always be putting them into those boxes. But anyways, I think what he's describing is you can't really tell someone how to love another person, but I think that Freud and Bion did a pretty good job of describing what not to do, you know, because when you really love somebody, like the way people date, like that when you're on like a dating app and the person has to check all these boxes, or like you're kind of like going through an interview or somebody, I guarantee you're gonna fail, you know, like it's just like, so it's not the way to approach a person, because if you're looking for love, it's about opening your heart to the person and all of who they are, right? And if you're not able to do that, you don't have to figure out what box they didn't tick. It just means that you weren't able to do that with that person. But loving somebody is about loving has a similar root to the word leave, to leave be, to leave them to be as they are.
That's interesting, you know, like bringing it full circle when it comes back to COVID and things like that, and differing opinions. That's what's required. Is that the leave be, the loving, right? Which is, I think, is the responsibility of us all now, despite beliefs, despite differing opinions, is to love as they are, and to seek understanding, empathy, like and as much as I felt like I said earlier, it's like me doing rigorous research, thinking, oh, you know, what's motivating that? What's motivating me to dig? And part of it is like, I'm tired of the confusion, you know? And like, I just want to give people the answer, right? And I think a lot of people want that. That, like, let's get rid of the uncertainty, but that's exactly what's causing the divide, right?
What? Yeah,
and that's what loving is you just have to, as they come.
Well, I think, I do think though that you're researching is a good thing, and I hope everyone researches in that sort of thing. I think you can have both in a way. Like, you can come up with really, really, really sophisticated, like, it's great to have opinions, right? And also to be able to realize that there's uncertainty even in holding an opinion. And I think you're right to let the uncertainty be, and to accept what's incredibly lacking in the dialogue is that, so say you're totally pro-vaccination and you feel that the mandates should be there because it protects everybody, or for whatever reason, why does that seem to so often preclude people or prevent people from simultaneously sympathizing with the incredible cost that is, you know, that it comes with fear, that people do feel restricted. You would think that you know, if you're really pro mandates and stuff, you may also have sympathy for yourself, right? Like that, like say back in the day, not very long ago, people would be quarantined and stuff, and say you were very pro all of the quarantines and the strictness of those things and pushing for more strictness around those things. Why not also simultaneously, and I think there are plenty of people who do simultaneously have a lot of sympathy, but I think what we see more of, the louder voices, tend to be those that do not share a lot of sympathy at the same time, and of course from the other side too. Like why not say, I really don't want mandates. I don't think that they're right. I don't think that they're justified, and also I can understand, that people are afraid, and
Isn't it interesting, like, we hear the louder voices, right, when you say that?
yeah,
It's exacerbated by the algorithms of social media, right? But if you say there was no social media, we just go to the streets. You go to, say, I'm just imagining Hollywood Boulevard,
mm,
and you see those guys with the big signs and the speakers yelling.
mhm.
Are those the ones that are influencing people? Are they triggering people responding in that moment to say, like, no, I don't believe in that,
Mm.
And whatever those signs say, whatever they're promoting, they're yelling at, condemning people. Do you see people going and responding to that? No.
Mm.
It's the fact it is on social media that they can comment from the safety of their home and respond to that. It propels it. It becomes more clickable, whatever
Yes,
triggers responses. But those same loud voices are the same crazy ones. They're not all crazy, but those same crazy people are just on the internet now. I think about that sometimes when I see crazy
Mhm.
stuff on the internet, and whether they're like, they can be anybody, right?
Mhm.
But you got an army that may be following them from the safety of their home. And you also have an army of people fighting them from the safety of their home.
Mhm.
But it's very, we can't just say those people don't exist anymore. And it's a lot easier. You don't gotta grab a sign and go to a public place and subject yourself to that.
Mhm. Well, yeah, but it's everywhere, and I do think, I mean, I'm not really old enough to know with a lot of confidence, but I do suspect that just the advent of social media as the new public forum, for ideas, I think it does. I think what you're saying about, the fact that people are kind of sitting behind a computer screen and it feels, relatively anonymous or less risky to, say these things, because you don't really have to see the effect you have on people. You don't have to see if you've made someone cry with how, bitter you were with your opinion, or, or even be afraid of their angry outburst in return. You just really, it's much more a feeling of exhilaration. That's my impression, is that, if you get into these online arguments, it's exhilarating. It's not a lot of anxiety. I would, yeah, I feel like I haven't heard about a lot of anxiety in these online, rage-a-thons, where people are being hyper opinionated. It's just like exhilarating. It's like, oh no, hell no, like that is so wrong, I gotta stand up to them, and you feel really good, you feel a bit self-righteous, right?
It's just like an intellectual game.
Yeah, it's like a bit masturbatory.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suspect that has made it worse, and of course I think the algorithms that have created ideological echo chambers. So you only see mainly two types of. I mean, other people have talked about this much more exhaustively, like in the recent documentary on social media. I forget what it's called, but.
Oh, not the documentary, the movie.
The movie, yeah, the movie.
Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, yeah. I mean, the simplest way that I've always understood it is that you see mainly two types of content. Either content that totally supports your idea, or content that enrages you about the opposition. And so you're always seeing a straw man representation of the other side. It makes them look so stupid, I mean, I swear, it's like people really feel that categorically the other side is stupid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's so not true. It's
not.
People are very thoughtful, like,
They're
I
good
live,
people.
yeah, great, wonderful people. Yeah. Yeah. Both sides. Yeah. It's crazy to think otherwise, I think.
Yeah, that's why I think if you can suspend the not knowing, it helps a lot. It helps a lot in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, we're all, the house is never fully built,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to science. If it was, then there would be no questions, right?
Yeah.
Health, bodies, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, it's very complex,
Yeah.
the way things interact.
And always changing.
Always changing.
And largely dependent on what way that you're looking at it. There's.
Yeah. So to pretend that you know, right? This is one thing that I always say this, but like the way it's like, if you claim to know, are you still open to learn? And that is, knowing is like it's like temporary. Like, knowing is not facts. It's not factual.
Mm.
It's a state of flux, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, knowledge is
It's not what most people mean, but I think you're right.
Yeah. Knowledge is not a concrete thing.
Mm.
It's like, that's where that idea of wisdom comes in. Is like, it's like you have to have the wisdom to know that knowledge is on trial constantly.
Yeah, I think of, one way to think about, I mean, for the most part, the term knowing in common usage is, I think, what cannot be rescued, probably, because I think it basically connotes certainty. It means certainty. Like, I know this as a fact. But I think that there is a more, I think that there are plenty of maybe more philosophically minded people who, or maybe even scientifically minded people who have a different view of epistemology, that it's to know something is more like to conjecture, to say this is how it seems to me. It's to create a statement about your thoughts about something. And I also, like, every time I think about the term knowing, I think of like the biblical knowing, like he knew her and that meant like sex with her, like, and I kind of like that reminder, because I think thinking, and this is another thing that Heidegger drew out very well, that thinking is a relational act. It's your relationship with the world, right? So you're always thinking towards something in the world, and you're thinking like after it. It's like, and you're never ever arriving and like, okay, it's thinking is never terminal.
Yeah.
Thinking is always generating, more thinking.
Yeah.
I think you might be able to think about knowledge that way, that knowing is more like an experience of intimacy with the world, or with another person, and that is always changing, because as soon as you come to know something or someone, that knowledge or that thinking then in turn, because then something has been revealed to you, that then changes you. And then, of course, that changes how you think. And then, it's relational. It's back and forth. It's two directions.
Yeah, like, I think of knowing as more of these kind of concrete things of reality, like gravity, like physics,
Mm-hmm.
where if I step on this floor, I know it supports me
Mm-hmm.
based off of the structure of it.
Mm.
or the experience of the past, where I stepped on this floor and it held me up, right? There's ground beneath that. Do I think the boards are gonna break when I step on it? No, I know they won't. I've done it many times.
Right.
So I think these things influence our knowing, but like I know I weigh this, because gravity poses its force on me in this way. So I know that. So there's certain like concrete things that I know about reality.
Or you could say that you think it with an incredible amount of confidence.
Yeah. So maybe it's just on a spectrum of confidence, right?
Right, because say you're weighing yourself, your weight is changing all the time, and you're weighing yourself. You don't know if the scale's right or what, but yeah, you can act with incredible confidence for sure.
Yeah, and that brings into these universal concepts of where these uncertainties come in, right? So you have a spectrum of confidence in your beliefs of knowing, but then you also have these concepts which are spread across all religions, which is like faith, hope, right? And what is the difference between hope and faith, right? These types of ideas, like you can use these words sometimes interchangeably. Like, I could say, I know this floor will hold me up when I step on it.
Yes.
Or I have faith it will. Or I hope it will. Hope is a bit of a question, right? Faith is a little bit more certain.
Yeah.
Unless there's some sort of thing I didn't calculate into my confidence, right?
Well, faith, I think implies that you're kind of like putting faith in it, so you're acting on it. You're not so tentative. It's like
I'm acting with belief.
Yeah.
So these are concepts that they're kind of inescapable when you come down to the core of action, like what you're doing. But yeah, man. we went on a roller coaster there.
Yeah.
So good. This is James.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm sure we'll have him back on the show.
Sounds good. We're brothers.
Yeah. Oh, James, he wanted to tell you guys, I was trying to keep it from y'all, but I guess it's out, You said dad earlier, and I was like, dang, you gotta say it like he's my dad too. And then he switched to like my father.
Well, even though we share dad in some sense, he's also a different father to each of us, It's like my dad, your dad.
We're cut from the same cloth, as you can see. So anyways, hope y'all enjoyed the conversation. Like, subscribe, share, all the things that
do the things
reinforce my identity as somebody. I don't know who I am.
As someone who matters to you.
Show me I matter. All right, y'all. Much love. Peace.